Good afternoon. I would like to call the meeting to order and welcome everyone in attendance. The committee has under consideration the estimates of the Ministry of Infrastructure for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2023. I'd ask that we go around the table and have members introduce themselves for the record. Minister, when we get to you, please introduce the officials who are joining you at the table. My name is Nathan Neudorf. I am the MLA for Lethbridge East and the chair of this committee. We will begin starting to my right.
Michaela Fry, MLA, Brooks Medicine Hat.
Miranda Rosen, MLA, Banff-Kamanaskis.
Glenn Van Dyken, Athabasca, Barhead, Westlock.
Jackie Armstrong Humnick, Fort Saskatchewan, Bakerville.
Garth Roosevelt, Vermilion Lloydminster, Wainwright.
Jordan Walker, Sherwood Park.
Prasad Panda, Calgary, Edgemont, and I'm the Minister of Infrastructure. I have our DM, Mary Person, our Chief of Staff, Ian Robertson, and our Chief Financial Officer, Dale Fung. And also we have other leadership team members with us, and they'll introduce themselves when they get to answer any questions.
Drew Barnes, MLA, Cypress Medicine Hat.
Sarah Hoffman, Edmonton, Glenora.
Good afternoon, John Carson, MLA, Edmonton, West Henday.
Rod Loyola, MLA for Edmonton Ellerslie.
Now I'll go to the members participating remotely. When I call your name, please introduce yourself for the record. Ms. Ahir.
Leela Sharon Ahir, Chestermere, Strathmore. Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you very much. I'd like to note for the following substitution for the record, Ms. Hoffman for Ms. Goring. A few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard staff. Committee proceedings are being live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meetings can be accessed via the Legislative Assembly website. Members participating remotely are encouraged to have your camera on while speaking and your microphone muted when not speaking. Remote participants who wish to be placed on the speakers list are asked to email or send a message in the group chat to the committee clerk, and members in the room are asked to please signal the chair. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of this meeting. I will quickly go back and ask if Mr. Dang would please introduce himself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thomas Dang, MLA for Edmonton South.
Thank you very much. Speaking, rotation, and time limits. Honourable members, the standing orders set out the process for consideration of the main estimates. A total of 2 hours has been scheduled for consideration of the estimates for the Ministry of Infrastructure. Standing Order 59.01 sub 7 establishes the speaking rotation and the speaking times. In brief, the Minister or member of Executive Council acting on the Minister's behalf will have 10 minutes to address the committee. At the conclusion of the Minister's comments, a 50-minute speaking block for the official opposition begins, followed by a 20-minute speaking block for all independent members, inclusive, if any, and then a 20-minute speaking block for the government caucus. Individuals may only speak for up to 10 minutes at a time, but may be combined between the member and the minister. After this, the rotation of speaking time will follow the same rotation of the official opposition, independent members, and then government caucus. The member and the minister may each speak once for a maximum of 5 minutes, or these times may be combined, making it a 10-minute block. If members have any questions regarding speaking times or rotation, please feel free to send an email or a message to the committee clerk about the process. Ministry officials may be present and at the direction of the minister may address the committee. Ministry officials seated in the gallery, if called upon, have access to the microphone in the gallery area and are asked to please introduce themselves for the record prior to commenting. Pages are available to deliver notes and other materials between the gallery and the table. Attendees in the gallery may not approach the table. Space permitting, opposition caucus staff may sit at the table to assist their members. However, members have the priority to sit at the table at all times. If debate is exhausted prior to the 2 hours, the ministry's estimates are deemed to have been considered for the time allotted in the schedule, and the committee will adjourn. Points of order will be dealt with as they arise, and individual speaking times will be paused. However, the speaking block time and the over 2 hour meeting clock will continue to run. Any written material provided in response to questions raised during the main estimates should be tabled by the minister in the Assembly for the benefit of all members. The vote on the estimates and any amendments will occur in Committee of Supply on March 21st, 2022. Amendments must be in writing and approved by Parliamentary Council prior to the meeting at which they are to be moved. The original amendment is to be deposited with the committee clerk with 20 hard copies. An electronic version of the signed original should be provided to the committee clerk for distribution to committee members. Finally, the committee should have the opportunity to hear both questions and answers without interruption during estimates debate. Debate flows through the chair at all times, including instances when speaking time is shared between the member and the minister. I would now invite the Minister of Infrastructure to begin with your opening remarks. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to present Alberta Infrastructure's estimates for the 2022-23 fiscal year and our 2022-25 business plan. With me at the table is Mary Person, our Deputy Minister, and along with her, our other leadership team also is here. Also in the public gallery were other ministry representatives, including some of my office staff. Budget 2022 is moving Alberta forward by strengthening our healthcare system, getting more Albertans working, and bringing our finances back into the black. We are moving forward to a time of economic recovery and prosperity where Albertans have opportunities to build their skills, pursue their passions, and support themselves and their families. As a lead ministry in the delivery of Budget 2022 Capital Plan, my team works with the government partners to move hundreds of infrastructure projects forward. Every infrastructure project we undertake counteracts pandemic-related challenges by boosting our economy and supporting well-paying, much-needed jobs. And when construction of these infrastructure projects like world-class schools, hospitals, cultural facilities, courthouses, and provincial buildings is complete, Albertans benefit over the long term as a result of increased access to the vital programs and services housed within these facilities. Ultimately, our efforts help ensure Albertans have thriving communities, great places to work, study, play, and call home. The 2022 Capital Plan is investing $20.2 billion over 3 years to build the public infrastructure Albertans need today and in future. Of this total 3-year investment, infrastructure's portion is $4.8 billion or 24%. As my ministry works with our partner ministries and stakeholders to build, renew, and maintain public infrastructure like schools and health and government facilities, we are guided by Infrastructure's 2022-25 business plan. Our efforts are also supported through Infrastructure's 2022-23 estimates totaling $2.3 billion. Of our budget total, the majority, $1.9 billion, is in the capital investment vote. This is an increase of $389 million or 26% from the 2021-22 forecast of $1.5 billion. This increase is mainly a result of the timing of cash flows needed to deliver approved school, health, and government facility capital projects. Funds in the capital investment vote align with the desired outcome 1 of Alberta Infrastructure's business plan, which is innovative, adaptive, and responsible infrastructure solutions that meet current and future provincial needs. This outcome reflects infrastructure's role in the timely, cost-effective planning, design, and construction of public facilities. These public facilities are necessary to support the delivery of government programs and services for Albertans. The majority of the $1.9 billion in our capital investment vote is split between health facilities and school infrastructure. Our health facilities infrastructure budget, $850.1 million, is dedicated to building new health facilities, renewing existing ones, and investing in health capital maintenance and renewal. Some of the health projects currently underway include in Calgary, the Calgary Cancer Center, which is on budget and on track to be completed later this year, the new Bridgeland Riverside Continuing Care Center, the Foothills Medical Center Urgent Power Plant Capacity, the Peter Lougheed Center Emergency Department, Mental Health Intensive Care Unit and Laboratory Redevelopment, and the Rocky View General Hospital redevelopment projects. Projects in Edmonton include the Gene Zwozdesky Center at Norwood, the University of Alberta Hospital Brain Center, Neurosciences Intensive Care Unit, the new Edmonton Hospital, and the Misericordia Community Hospital modernization, which is expected to be completed late this year. 188.9 million of the total funding is being directed to cover the costs of repairs, upgrades, maintenance, and replacement of building systems and building service equipment for various health facilities. Our school infrastructure budget, $643.8 million, is dedicated to constructing new facilities, modernizing existing schools, and investing in school capital maintenance. This includes new funding of $43.6 million in 22-23 or $251.3 million over 3 years in the capital plan for 15 school projects. Currently, there are 66 school projects underway in planning, design, or construction phase. These projects are creating thousands of jobs and ensuring Alberta students have access to world-class learning facilities. Infrastructure's capital investment vote also dedicates $263.2 million to property management, which includes maintenance and renewal for government-owned facilities and government accommodation projects that help reduce our environmental footprint, and $114 million in government facilities infrastructure for construction of facilities such as the new Red Deer Justice Center, the Agri-Value Processing Business Incubator in Leduc, the Canmore Nordic Center, the Yellowhead Youth Center in Edmonton, the Court of Appeal in Calgary, and the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner also in Calgary. Infrastructure also supports desired outcome 1 of our business plan by working toward continuous improvement and making sure we get best value for taxpayers' dollars in every way we can. That's why we have established Infrastructure's new Alternative Capital Financing Partnerships Office division to expand on the great work already started by our Public-Private Partnerships or P3 office. The focus of this new division is pursuing alternative funding approaches to build and maintain infrastructure that saves taxpayers' dollars or generate revenues. Alternative financing approaches, such as using P3s, inviting unsolicited proposals, and working with the federal government to access funding programs, encourage the private sector to come forward with creative financing solutions to help provide the facilities and other infrastructure Albertans need. An example of how Albertans benefit from alternative funding is the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. Through ICIP, the federal government is providing $3.66 billion to support infrastructure projects in Alberta. As of date, 85 projects in over 30 Alberta constituencies have been approved. In addition, dozens of capital maintenance and renewal project bundles to upgrade publicly owned facilities were approved through an ICIP COVID-19 resilience stream. Looking at infrastructure's 22-23 expense vote now, which is $441.4 million, this is a decrease of $5.3 million, which is just 1% from the 21-22 forecast of $446.8 million. Generally speaking, this budget is virtually unchanged from last year. But the small difference is mainly due to higher utility costs and some day-to-day operational costs for government facilities in 21-22. About 90% of all operating expense is devoted to the management of government space, the most significant components being for leases and property management. Infrastructure's expense vote mainly supports desired outcome 2 of our business plan. This outcome is Alberta's public infrastructure is effectively and responsibly managed and sustainable. This reflects my ministry's efforts to effectively manage government-owned and operated facilities with a focus on sound financial stewardship, quality and efficient use of government assets. Overall, the expense budget covers funding for day-to-day operations of more than 1,500 infrastructure-owned or leased buildings, including the Swan Hills Treatment Center, management of lease space to meet government program needs, and staffing to support these activities. It also provides some funding for ongoing capital planning activities in support of the capital plan. My ministry's commitment to Albertans is that we'll continue to follow through on our business plan outcomes.
Excuse me, Minister. I'm sorry to interrupt. That concludes the 10-minute portion. For the next 50 minutes, members of the official opposition and the minister may speak. Honourable members, you will be able to see the timer for the speaking block both in the committee room and on Microsoft Teams. Member, would you like to combine your time with the ministers?
Yes, most definitely, Mr. Chair.
Minister, are you agreeable to combine time? Thank you. You may proceed.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate having the opportunity to address the minister and the staff here. I want to thank them for taking time out of their day to ask, so that I can ask these questions on behalf of Albertans. Minister, just to kind of like put everything into a framework, as you do every year, you send out a general email to all of the MLAs requesting what infrastructure asks are being requested in their own constituencies. And I was hoping that you could shed a little bit more light on what happens to that particular list after you receive all of those requests.
Thank you. We received that information from 87 MLAs, and we tried to understand the local priorities of each constituency, and we bring it up with the partner ministries. We discuss with the Treasury Board's team who are involved in capital planning process to prioritize funding. But as you know, it's the budget is limited, and we try to fit in those projects by working with partner ministries.
Of course, and you hit a very specific key word there, and that is prioritize. So this is what I'm really interested in knowing. How do you then begin to prioritize these projects when there's so many requests coming in from all over the province? What's the process?
Yeah, I can ask our DM to tell you the actual capital planning process. But I want you to know that there are the outcomes government is mandated. So whether it is social outcomes or economic outcomes, we had to fit in those. But I would ask our DM person to talk about it.
Thank you. So it is making sound decisions about infrastructure investment helps boost economic recovery and ensure Alberta's public infrastructure is in good shape. So most of the decisions are actually made through partner ministries who actually put forward their priorities because they actually have some of their criteria.
Interrupt?
Of course.
So then what I'm interested in knowing then is to what degree do the partner ministries actually influence the process and do
Point of order has been noted.
Under 23BI, I'm just curious as to exactly where in the estimates the honourable member is pointing to. He has not referenced a line item nor a page in the fiscal plan or the ministry's business plan. So I'm just curious if we could get back to this matter at hand, which is the government estimates that are in front of us today.
You wish to respond?
Mr. Chair, as I said, I'm framing the potential the questions that I will be asking as I move forward. And it has everything to do with prioritizing and how everything is decided, which actually goes into the business plan, the capital plan, the fiscal plan. All of this is related. So I don't understand why this is not a point of order. And I would request that I be able to continue with my line of questioning, please.
I do agree at this time. I do not find a point of order. I do ask you to continue and establish that reference to the estimates and business plan at your earliest convenience. Thank you.
So as was the question, is I'm wondering about the influence of the associated ministries, and do some ministries have more pull over the process? What I'm basically asking for is what is the process? How and how is that actually achieved? And what ministries actually have influence over the process?
Right, I think it's a generic question you're asking, but so, for example, if it is education, which is a partner ministry, or health, they give, they transfer their budget to us to build the projects. So you'll get an opportunity to ask them the same questions when you attend their budget estimates, whether it is municipal affairs, for example, or health and education or justice. Usually, for example, in case of schools, school boards prioritize and they talk to, based on their student population and safety requirements, the enrollment pressures they face. They have certain criteria to work with the school boards to prioritize, and when they get that in front of education, then that goes to Treasury Board, and based on the overall budget available, they prioritize based on the school board's prioritization. And the same thing with health. We get input from MLAs like you, representing your constituents, and we aggregate all that information. When I say aggregate, I mean consolidate, sorry. We consolidate all that information and review that in the capital plan process.
Mr. Chair, through you to the minister, I appreciate that you're highlighting this, but I'm still no clearer on the actual prioritization process that you as the Minister of Infrastructure implement, you and your staff within the ministry. And this is what I'm trying to focus on.
Right.
This is what Albertans want to know.
Yeah, I thought the discussion is about budget, but I can tell you that's why we brought in this Infrastructure Accountability Act, which is legislating the prioritization criteria, so Albertans get to know, and also they have certainty and predictability on the funding criteria. For example, the 6 criteria the government must consider when evaluating capital planning submission. Number 1, address health and safety and compliance needs.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I can't read that in the plan itself, but we're no closer to the actual question that Albertans want to know, and that is how you prioritize. We know the criteria.
Right.
Okay, but regardless, if you don't want to answer that, even though it is part of the business plan, 1.2 specifically states that delivering capital projects on time, on budget, and to scope to ensure Albertans have access to the infrastructure that provide the high-quality public service on which they rely.
Right.
So that's what I'm after. I'm after how you prioritize this.
There
because it's
you
part of the
go.
capital.
You read that. That is the process. What you read is what is the guideline for us to prioritize projects.
But you're not shedding any further light on the actual prioritization process. You have mentioned that there are certain ministries that have influence over the process. So,
Right.
And so I'm wondering, like, to what degree do you have power over actually what decisions are made and how they are made?
Well, I'm invited to the Treasury Board meetings when capital projects are discussed. I give my input based on that criteria legislated in the Alberta Infrastructure Act, and our professionals in our department, they add value to that capital plan process, but it actually resides in Treasury Board now. That functionality is moved from infrastructure to
Thank you
Treasury
very much. I
Board.
really appreciate, and that's the answer that I was looking for. Moving on then, Mr. Chair, then, Budget 2022 enacts significant cuts to municipalities. So on page 210 of the fiscal plan, we see a forecasted capital plan spending for municipal affairs at 1.737 billion in the current fiscal year, going down to 781 million for fiscal year 2022-2023. So that's roughly $1 billion cut. So while some of this was expected, you're balancing the books on behalf of municipalities, and people are feeling it with an increased property taxes. So your downloading strategy is making life more expensive for Albertans at a time when they're getting hit with higher grocery bills, higher utility bills, higher insurance rates, higher tuition fees, and of course the list goes on, Minister. So why is downloading costs onto ratepayers and homeowners the single biggest thing your ministry is doing in Budget 2022 when it comes to the capital plan and municipalities?
Again, respectfully, we are here to review infrastructure budget estimates, but I'll address it, but if you want to dive in deep, I encourage you to contact the Minister of Municipal Affairs. But my understanding is, not my understanding, it's a fact that we accelerated CMR budget during the pandemic time to help municipalities and the counties. So we brought forward some of the future years' budget to help them during the time of pandemic, and $1.2 million, $1.2 billion decrease in municipal sustainability initiative, and $134 million decrease in investing in IC projects. That is overall there is only 28 million decrease because of that that reason I mentioned, because the front loading means MSI funding for 22-23 has been reduced proportionately to the extent that was accelerated in the previous years during the pandemic. And I'm sure Minister McIver may be able to provide you a better answer on that.
I'd like to interject to make sure that we do bring this back to estimates for infrastructure. It's not the minister's responsibility to answer on behalf of other ministers in other ministries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. But of course, ultimately, Minister, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Minister, you are in charge of the Alberta government infrastructure. You're the infrastructure minister after all. So either in this, earlier in this mandate, your government decided to stop paying half the taxes it owes to municipalities for the government of Alberta buildings. Okay? You cut what is known as grants in place of taxes. So you're forcing property tax owners to pay more to service government buildings in their communities. We're talking about buildings in communities. I know municipal leaders were disappointed, to put it mildly, but you did. Why didn't you reverse this deeply unfair decision in budget 2022?
Again, I suspect that belongs to municipal affairs, unless you have some information on that.
No, Minister, that is an operating line in the municipal affairs estimates.
So as Chair, I would again ask the members opposite to bring their questioning back to the Ministry of Infrastructure, which is under consideration today, not municipal affairs.
Mr. Chair, respectfully, we're talking about community buildings, which is under the responsibility of the Minister of Infrastructure. So I'm asking questions that are pertinent to the responsibility of the Minister of Infrastructure.
As long as it's a line item in the estimates under infrastructure, then you can ask that question. But as indicated by the Deputy Minister, that was a line item under the municipal affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So through you to the Minister then, as we've covered, there's a process by which you ask MLAs for feedback on infrastructure requests, but I'm also sure that you hear directly from communities themselves. Representatives from these communities approach you to ask about these. So I'm assuming that you've heard from Okotoks, and they've been asking for help to get a new water line to help facilitate growth. And they've been asking for provincial support. Is there capital plan money for this critical infrastructure in this budget for the community of Okotoks?
That is actually the water lines belong to transportation, believe it or not.
Okay. So with this budget then, the government appears to be backtracking on its promises. A few years ago, the Premier promised the people of Lethbridge a new bridge over the Old Man River, hence a new bridge over Highway 3. And then this is now the fourth budget you've presented as the infrastructure minister. So a few questions on this, if you don't mind. The new bridge somewhere hidden?
Point of order has been called.
Again, under 23B, although I guess it could be also 23C under repetition, you've asked this member now, I believe 3 times you've intervened to stick to the estimates at hand, which is the Ministry of Infrastructure, in case we're confused. And I failed to see how asking about transportation, I think, but we started municipal affairs, we went to transportation. We failed to find, to the point where the Deputy Minister intervened and said that was actually municipal affairs matter. So I'm curious, Mr. Chair, how we can continue to persist in needless repetition, how we can continue to not make relevant comments to the government estimates at hand and continue our questioning.
Ms. Hoffman?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate that the line of questioning might be uncomfortable for some government members, but as was noted, it relates to the business plan, item 1.2, around delivering capital projects on time, on budget, and to scope to ensure Albertans have access to infrastructure. And as was mentioned by my colleague, Mr. Loyola, these were projects that were previously announced by the government, so asking for accountability to check in on scope of these capital projects as they relate to the much needed capital projects on time, on budget, and to scope, I think is certainly within order of this discussion. Thank you very much.
This time I do find a point of order. I would ask that if the members opposite have found in this capital plan or any capital plan mention of the Highway 3 bridge, then they would have access to ask about it. But I, as a member from the Lethbridge East, know that it has not been. So I would ask the members to direct their question to those items specifically within the Ministry of Infrastructure that are noted within either the business plan or the estimates, and I'll continue to direct their questions to the Minister of Infrastructure. So I would ask them to leave that question and move on to the next item, please.
Okay, Mr. Chair. So then, since the minister doesn't want to answer those questions, then, I mean,
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order has been called.
Under 23H, imputes false motive to another member. You can't just get on a tangent about how the minister doesn't want to answer questions. The business at hand here is related to government estimates for the Ministry of Infrastructure. We have failed to see this member connect his comments to that ministry, and now he is making accusations against the Minister of Infrastructure. It's completely unacceptable.
To respond?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I worry that the continued points of order will simply eat into our time. So let's withdraw that last comment, and please have an opportunity for the minister and or deputies or others to actually respond to the questions that are absolutely worthy of debate here. And we'll withdraw that word so that we can get on and use our time to drill into this budget, because it's important that we get some answers for the people of Alberta.
Thank you.
Including bridges in southern Alberta.
Thank you very much. Just points of order do not affect the block time, although they will eat up overall time. And I appreciate the indication there. I would ask the member to be careful of the beginning comments as he asks this question, but please proceed.
thank you, Mr. Chair. So we all want to see more capital projects in our communities. They improve quality of life, create broader economic opportunities, and of course create immediate construction jobs. So many of these projects are built by local authorities, but as part of Budget 2022, the government decided to increase the borrowing rate for local authorities, which includes municipalities. So you've increased the borrowing rate between 0.5% and 0.75%, which is effectively a new tax or a surcharge on every single municipal capital project in the province. So why are you trying to balance the budget by leveling this new tax on municipalities?
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, there were few other members in this room who, when I was not a minister, when I was opposition member, conducting myself in these committees, it looks like there is a mix-up in the binder or something. I'm just getting confused because that question belongs to Treasury Board and Finance. Infrastructure doesn't control the rates of interest or borrowing. Unfortunately, I would love to answer you. I want to be held accountable. I'm not a super minister. I have a limited budget, and I have my scope of work to deliver for partner
Mr. Chair,
ministries.
the minister himself already stated on the record that they work together with other ministries in order to meet the criteria and decide on the priorities on the capital plan, on the projects that are done for communities. And this is part of your responsibility as the Minister of Infrastructure. It's a very clear question. that why you must have okayed this then, because you're the one that's telling me that you're sitting around the table with the Minister of Treasury Board and Finance and you're okaying this decision.
Yeah.
So again, I'm going to ask you to answer the question. Why the increase to 0.75%?
Yeah, so you're asking me the questions that actually are the main accountability of my partner ministries. So that's why I'm unable to answer that. And respectfully, the way the government operates, the structure didn't change. When NDP was the government, I never asked those questions, knowing well, each minister has their scope of work. So I can find answers and submit through the chair later if that helps. But I would encourage you again to focus on my budget line items and my business case.
Okay.
I do want to answer you, but I don't have answers you're asking for other ministries.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So then, if you could find out answers, I would really appreciate that, because it is associated to the work you do within the Ministry of Infrastructure.
Mr. Laila, respectfully, infrastructure touches every ministry by the nature of it. Mm-hmm. But former Minister Hoffman would know. So when she was the health minister, she was giving budget to infrastructure to build health projects. That is limited to that scope, but Brian Mason didn't have all the information about other ministries. That's where my frustration is.
Okay, so then in this decision being made, I'm wondering then did you hear of any modeling on how this new tax would drive down the investment of jobs when decisions were being made around this particular decision?
I could make a general comment through you, Mr. Chair. This government has actually focused on economic outcomes that will provide funding for infrastructure. That's how we could adopt previous NDP government's outgoing capital plan of minimum $6.4 billion per year. We guaranteed that when we took office. In fact, we increased that, and we provided additional stimulus during pandemic. So that is because of the policies that attracted investments and helped the economic recovery and growth. We could fund these projects. That's my general observation.
Okay. So then no answer on that particular question. So in Strathcona County, they're looking at some major new capital projects that would create some badly needed jobs. The CFO of the county is reporting that for every $10 million in borrowing over their 20-year life cycle, residents are now going to pay $1.5 million more in interest, and that means property taxes will have to go up. What led the ministry to the idea of taxing municipalities more to balance the books? And what is your message as the infrastructure minister to municipalities who are just trying to build capital projects cost effectively?
Yeah, I happened to meet many of these municipal partners when I traveled all over Alberta last 2 years, and they all know pretty well how much investments flown into those communities. Every member here can talk about the projects they got in their constituencies, which were benefiting their local municipalities. So we have been proactively engaging municipal partners. We removed roadblocks for their local needs, and we built infrastructure in every corner of the province. And they are quite happy when I talk to them.
No.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. That's not what I'm hearing. So let me ask you this then, and then you mentioned at the opening then alternative financing approaches. You highlighted P3. So when it comes to communities like Strathcona County, what is this government actually offering communities around Alberta in order to address the issue that you're increasing taxing on municipalities for this when it comes to capital projects in their communities.
So those municipal partners have actually have been in touch through our local MLAs in each riding, apart from my partner ministries, but the local MLAs also engage them. We are getting their input, and they told us what their local needs are, and
Mr.
they
Chair,
felt
that's
supported.
not, Mr. Chair, through you to the minister, that's not the question I was asking. I'm asking you about the alternative financing, and you specifically highlighted P3s. What I want to know is if communities all around Alberta can expect more P3 projects in their communities with this government moving forward.
Yes.
That's what okay. Now, have you done assessments on the existing P3 projects that the Ministry of Infrastructure has already committed to and have already been completed?
In the past, the government of Alberta delivered infrastructure projects under P3 that saved millions of dollars for Albertans. Projects were finished on time. That's why our government got the mandate to implement more P3s, which we started.
Mr. Chair, through you to the minister, is there a list that you can provide us with that actually highlights all of the P3 projects and whether they did come in on time?
Right.
Like I'm not questioning, I'm not saying.
Yeah, it's public information, Member Laila.
So
if
then
you
could
want, we can give you the list.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Then,
Yeah.
so then, what other projects, what other kind of infrastructure projects in communities then, other than schools, because schools tends to be the highest, can you
Right.
give me another example of P3 projects that are actually being implemented in communities around Alberta?
Right now, we are evaluating P3 projects. Transportation is, for example, evaluating P3
Now you want to talk about
projects.
transportation.
Yeah.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. So P3 Secretariat resides in Infrastructure Department under Deputy Minister person. We collaborate with partner ministries like Transportation, for example. If they have a P3, that's worked in conjunction with our P3 Secretariat. And usually the project requests come through local elected officials, but in some cases, when those things falls through the cracks, we have this unsolicited P3 process which communities can access, and they can send their request through that P3 Secretariat, and we evaluate those projects. One such example, recently, just last week, we announced Red Deer Children Advocacy Center. That's unsolicited P3. That's the first one under unsolicited P3. But other P3 projects could be health projects, could be transportation, apart from schools.
Thank you, to the minister, through you, Mr. Chair. So then you're saying that Albertans can be expecting more P3 projects in healthcare around the province?
Absolutely. If they're determined there is a value for money, so our team, that P3 Secretariat, goes through the process, and they have a process to determine there is value for money for taxpayer funded projects, then they go through the P3 process. If not, they go through the traditional procurement of design, bid, build, and
Thank you,
other
Minister. Could
traditional
you
procurement.
highlight the process then for me? Because it's, I'd like more clarity on how this is actually decided. So yes, I see the community can request it. And then at that point, I go through this P3 Secretariat, which is part of your ministry,
Right.
correct? And then, so then what is the process at that point?
Okay, can one of the medium step forward to talk about any P3?
Yeah, Ghassan Shazli, ADM for capital projects at the Ministry of Infrastructure. So major capital projects undergo an assessment through an opportunity paper once they are announced, in which we look at the value for money initially, and then we take it, if there is indication that there is value for money in it, through the business case, it proceeds onto different levels of P3 assessment. Each step goes back to Treasury Board for approval. And if it fails to meet the criteria for P3, it moves on to the traditional methods, such as design, build, etc.
Okay, is there any place where I could find out more about how the process actually takes place in more detail?
I believe on our website, on the government website, there is a reference to the entire P3 process and the framework under which we operate.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Minister, through you, Mr. Chair, of course. Minister, have you received any requests from any communities across Alberta for a P3 project relating to healthcare?
There was one urban wellness center initiative that came through, but that belongs to health. We evaluated, we assisted them to work with health, and then...
Sorry, Minister, I didn't hear. Which community was that?
It's Urban Wellness Center. But that's in Edmonton. Yeah.
Yes.
Here in Edmonton?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, just wanted to...
Covenants announced it.
Yeah, so it seems Covenant already announced that
Okay.
project. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move on to the subject of project overages. So I'd like to ask, so it was reported in the Alberta Gazette that in Edmonton, the industrial health lab restoration was 77% over budget. What happened and what are you doing to stop this type of overage? Alberta Gazette, Part 1, Volume 117, Number 2.
Is that part of this budget? Does it belong to any line item?
It's an overage of an actually existing project, Minister. And it's your under 1A of the business plan, it's your responsibility to know these things.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I had to get back on that.
Right.
Now we are talking about the project progress and what lessons learned from that project. So.
Okay, so then you'll commit to getting back to me on this particular project?
Yeah.
Which was 77% over budget.
Okay.
Okay. Just a few months later, that project went to 101% over budget. So just to give you a little bit more feedback on that. And this was, as I said, reported in the Alberta Gazette. So in Calgary, the FMC power plant upgrade was 50% over budget. What can you tell me about this particular project and why was it so over budget as well?
Which project again in Calgary?
The FMC power plant upgrade.
Oh, Foothills Medical Center. We are actually implementing that project right now as we speak. It's
again, this was referenced in the Alberta Gazette, Part 1, Volume 117, and this one in number 3.
Previous phases, maybe.
Okay, well, could you give me a little bit more detail?
We are actually
on the
expanding
actual
that project, which is going through design right now. Captive power plant at Foothills Medical Center. Does anyone have?
Can I do some clarity, Minister?
Yeah. So the completion of that project is in spring 2023. Probably you're talking about the previous phases of that project.
They're talking about contracts that may not affect the overall total.
Yeah.
Okay, but regardless of the
So
fact,
DM
on
has
the
a comment
performance
to make.
metrics, it's the responsibility to know about these overages, and I would
Right.
like a clarification on actually both projects, because one is, well, it was stated in the Alberta Gazette, one was 101% over budget, and this one's 50% over budget. It's the responsibility of the ministry to keep track of these things, correct? So regardless of where it was in the project phase, it's still an overage.
Member Loyola, permission?
Yeah, please go ahead.
What's published in the Gazette is some of the construction contract phase. It might not necessarily pertain to the overall project budget. So we may be spending more on a certain element of the contract and with a certain contractor if the bids come in high, but we do have some contingencies and some others. So we do track that as well as our overall project budget. And so that is what our performance measure is and where we are tracking to be 96% on time and on budget. So the Gazette reflects changes in anticipated contract costs, which we do track, sometimes creates overage and sometimes does not. In this case, I do not believe it's creating an overage, but
Okay, where can we get more details on this then?
It seems the Sun has some information on that. You have to introduce yourself every time.
Yeah, Christian Shazli, ADM for capital projects. 1 second, please. So it's not considered an overage. It's a contract adjustment for additional work. The particular case that you are referring to. Yeah. The cogeneration project, that is.
Sorry, could you just repeat that one more time?
So I believe it's not over budget, but the contract was increased to include the cogeneration component. So this is a type of project that under CM, so you progressively add scope to it as you're designing it. It's a fast track sort of contract, so it's not over budget. It's all within the budget. The announcement we do announce it in the Gazette every time there's a change, but it's a change not because it went over budget, but because the scope was awarded.
The scope was, okay. So then that was the case for the industrial health lab restoration. Then?
We'll look into them and get back to you if you like.
Okay, well then if I could then please also ask about in Airdrie, the provincial building main floor restoration, according to the Alberta Gazette, was 69% over budget. So if I could get information on that as well, I would really appreciate that. I want to turn my attention right now to the Edmonton Hospital, which was, of course, was announced several years ago now, and has seen a significant delay over the next several years. And I see that for this year's estimates, a total of $49 billion has been allocated, with $22 million for the following year, and then with a significant increase for the 2024-2025 budget. So can you please explain the rationale behind these allocations, so we may have a clear picture of what your ministry has planned for the project?
So in budget 21-22, we have 14 million, and then 22-23, we have 48 million. And 23-24, we have 22.28 million, and in 24-25, 300 million. So that's for the next 3 years, about 371 million is allocated for the project right now. Site work activity is well underway, and then we are committed to making world-class healthcare accessible to all Albertans. When completed, that hospital will increase access and capacity to needed health services and programs in Edmonton.
I appreciate that, Minister. Thank you very much. And of course, this is exactly what Albertans want to see out of a new hospital in Edmonton's southwest, of course. And of course, when we had started this project, our goal was to have it done in 9 years. Now that's being pushed out further and further and further. Edmontonians are expecting it. What's the justification for pushing this project so far out?
No, I appreciate your concern about the project schedule, but what happened recently was because of the pandemic, AHS and Alberta Health representatives, they had to be at table with the Alberta infrastructure team to develop a clinical services plan, functional programming, business case, and needs assessment and all that in certain health projects, including this South Edmonton. It impacted because of the pandemic priorities of Alberta Health Services. So there was some minor delay, but as I mentioned to you, the contract was awarded to put in site services, mainly utilities, and that work is going on parallelly at the same time. All the upfront planning and design, unless we do that properly, we all learned something at the Grand Prairie, so we just want to make sure all those front-end planning and design activities take place properly, so we don't run into schedule delays and cost overruns on major projects like
I'm
that.
glad you're talking about lessons learned. Of course, that's very important. So, Minister, through you, Mr. Chair, of course, what is the operation in service date for the new Edmonton Hospital?
What's the official date?
What can I tell constituents?
We're still in planning, it's just investigating.
So, as I said, it's still in planning, and the completion date is yet to be determined as the project progresses, because contract is not awarded. Once the contract is awarded, we sit with the contractor and develop the schedule for construction start and finish dates.
With all due respect, Minister, I appreciate that, but I mean, you have performance metrics for just these kinds of things. So this is what I'm asking is, what is the operation in service date, the estimated, right, for the Edmonton Hospital? What can I tell constituents in South Edmonton that are requesting this hospital? This is what they would like to know. People in neighboring communities would also like to know, because they will be accessing the hospital as well.
No, they would certainly appreciate you expressing the concerns on their behalf. I too appreciate, but you have to understand, we haven't awarded the main contract yet. Till we get that stage, I can't give you a drop dead date. I can give you generic timelines for major projects, but in this case, because the design is not finalized, we still have to work with Alberta Health Services to get to that stage.
So you did mention that you have awarded the project to contract.
Site services.
Site services?
Yeah, to put
Okay.
the utilities
Right.
to
So
service.
have you had any
the-
issues on that particular aspect
No,
with the
that will be
contractors?
finished. That contract was awarded last year, and it will be finished.
The city of Edmonton has some changes, we've addressed them.
Okay, I'm just told the city of Edmonton requested some changes to be incorporated in the design, so we just
Okay,
finished that. And the
Does
work
that mean there will
will
be a delay?
the work will be finished this fall, next
Yeah,
fall,
it's
2023.
completion. I don't have the date here. Don't have the date, Kassan might know the date.
Do you have the 2023 fall?
Sorry?
Fall of 2023.
Fall of 2023? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
That for that specific scope.
Okay, so can you tell me right now then, how many dollars have been actually contractually committed for the project?
For that scope of work.
The cost of the scope's 40.
It's estimated to be $40 million for underground utilities.
Sorry, how much?
$40 million.
Okay. Okay. So then, based on what you have, and or if your staff can help us out with this, so what is the full estimated cost of the hospital?
It has to be finalized.
Hasn't been finalized.
Yeah, it depends on the scope of the project, how many beds and what type of specialties are required. Based on that, the final budget will be
Okay,
finalized.
So at this point, you can't share a number with me?
No.
No? Okay. No, this is the Edmonton. Oh, please go ahead if you would like.
Do you mind?
No, please go ahead.
Thank you very much to my colleague and through you, Mr. Chair. It shocks me that the government could stand up a few weeks ago and announce a project with a dollar figure for Red Deer that hasn't done any of the same level of scoping, sequencing, or had the same amount of time to go into it, but says that there isn't a dollar figure tied to the Edmonton Hospital, which has been needed for decades, and now here we are saying that there's no scope or sequence and therefore no dollar figure. How is it that the infrastructure minister could stand in Red Deer and give a dollar figure there, but can't today in estimates for Edmonton?
May I,
You may
Mr.
answer.
Chair? Through you, Mr. Chair, to the former Minister of Health, who would know full well that Red Deer Hospital, just for your information, how many rounds of functional programming? We did 6? Sixth, so we actually went through that process of estimates and functional programming. We did 6 times. Because of those delays with the HS resources being tied up with COVID management, it got delayed. We had to do it multiple times, 6 rounds of functional programming. That's how we arrived at that budget number for Red Deer Hospital. But on the specific Edmonton South Hospital, we haven't gone through that process yet.
So through you, Mr. Chair, it seems like a significant question of priorities, since this was a project that the government was happy to stand in front of signs in South Edmonton 4 years ago and talk about the need for that hospital. But is it true, from what I just heard, can the minister clarify, is he saying that they haven't done functional design reviews at all for South Edmonton, but they did for Red Deer for 6 rounds, when Red Deer wasn't in former capital plans, but the South Edmonton Hospital was in the capital plan previously? Has that work been delayed? And what does that say to the people of the capital region who are in desperate need of a hospital on the south side?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm only minister for 2.5 years. Now, 4 years ago, it may be the other minister, which the member would know, who would have stood in front of that for a photo op, not me. The only time I was there was to announce the underground services contract. We mobilized the equipment that day when I was there. We actually put shovels in ground. And about Red Deer, it's true, NDP didn't prioritize that project. We did, and we worked on that process, because in any major project like that, we needed a clinical services plan, functional programming, business case, needs assessment. All those things were done in Red Deer. That's how we could get that through the capital planning process. And we are going to do the same thing with the Edmonton Hospital as we progress on that project.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. I'm glad you bring it back to the Edmonton Hospital. So if you can't give me an estimated cost on the new hospital in South Edmonton, then how much has been contractually committed to the hospital to date?
So if you don't mind, DM.
So, Mr. Member, we have done 5 rounds of functional programming for the new Edmonton Hospital. We're doing a 6th this year, as well as the site works in tandem. And I think I will have to get back to you with how much has been committed contractually. But as we are still in planning, there's still an expectation, as you saw in the cash flows, significant over the next 3 years.
If we could get that information, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, I see that I have less than 2 minutes here. So like you, we were engaged in pre-budget consultations. We spoke with industry and they had some good ideas about project tendering that I would like to ask you about. Frequently, you go out to tender on a number of projects all at the same time. So take schools, for example, you might tender 10 school projects all at the same time. For medium-sized contractors, they don't have the capacity to bid on all 10. So maybe they can do 1 or 2 simultaneously. So as a result of current practices, many medium-sized contractors feel that they are getting shut out of the government procurement process. So have you considered more staggered tendering on major government projects like schools?
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chair, I think that you also talked to me on this topic as a former member of Lethbridge Construction Association. We heard the similar concerns. But in this case, unless they are going through P3 process, other individual schools are mostly locally awarded to the local contractors. Only when we find a value for money in a P3 bundle, we bundle schools in the nearest geographic area, and to get the to reach the threshold limit, so the proponents for the proponents that is attractive enough, and also for the taxpayers there is a good return on investment. Only in that case we bundle. Otherwise, individual projects are awarded to the local contractors.
Thank you. This concludes the first portion of questions for the official opposition. I will provide a correction. Points of order do stop time or do not stop time. So I apologize for that. I did try to resolve those points as quickly as possible to minimize that impact. Any information requested by the minister and agreed to by the minister to be provided should be done so and tabled in the chamber. If you need any direction, the clerk will be happy to provide that for you. We will now move on to any independent members for 20 minutes of questioning. Would you like to combine your time with the minister? I believe we're going to Ms. MLA Dang first.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to combine my time with the minister. And Mr. Chair, if you could just set a timer for 10 minutes for me, if that's okay.
Yes, we will notify you at 10 minutes time. And Minister, I assume you're continuing on sharing time is fine?
No problem.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to start by saying how profoundly disappointed I am in some of the answers the minister was just giving to the official opposition regarding the South Edmonton Hospital. As we've already laid out today, compared to last year's budget target, the estimate for the South Edmonton Hospital is down by $101 million, which is a significant amount. And frankly, Minister, in 2017, when the hospital was first announced, and I remember I was there, the target open date, I believe, was 2025 for that project. Now, of course, you're telling this committee and Albertans that it appears there is no target open date at all, no target open year at all. Could you confirm that for me?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just answered Member Lyall on the same thing, that we are still going through the process in finalizing the project scope, and then we go into the next phase, which is the design, and then we go into the procurement, then we award the contract, then we'll have the firm date on that.
Right. Thank you. But I guess one of the key objectives in your business plan, objective 1.2, outcome 1, is to deliver capital projects on time, on budget, and to the scope to ensure Albertans have access to the infrastructure that provide high-quality public services on which they rely, end quote. So, like I said, that you've already announced previously that you had delayed this project. Originally, the project was scheduled to open in 2025. You announced in when you were elected and first appointed the Minister of Infrastructure, the project would be delayed to 2030. Is it correct that now you are delaying that additionally and no longer providing any timelines for what that may look like?
So, so Health Department probably determined when they needed that hospital was 2030. I haven't heard of any further delays.
So I guess what I'm asking then is that you've shown in your budget here on page 166 of your capital plan that there's $101 million reduced. I asked why that cash flow number had changed, why there was so much less money committed this year than even last year you had projected you would commit. Last year you had told this committee, you had told the legislature you were going to spend $101 million more dollars than you actually plan to now. That's just the facts on the paper. So given that, and given that during the Q&A in the technical briefing on budget day, I asked what was the reason for this number change, and the answer was delays to functional programming and COVID-19. And since it's your department's responsibility to ensure that this project is built on time, can you clarify specifically what those functional and programming delays are?
Before I answer about functional programming, your main question was the budget adjustment. The budget for projects like this are adjusted on an ongoing basis based on the progress of the project. If you tie down the money in a project which is not progressed as much, then you would want to move that money to the other project, which is
Right. So I think we've already established,
so
Minister,
it's
that
an
we're
ongoing
delaying the project.
it's an
And I'm happy
ongoing
to-
account
that you're admitting
adjustment
that.
process.
Stop, please. If you ask a question, the minister is entitled to answer this. And so I would ask you not speak over one another, but address to the chair. I will ask the minister to finish, knowing that the member has limited time and would like to ask another question.
To Member Dang, the budget adjustment is an ongoing process based on the progress on the project, based on the schedule, the milestone payments and other forecasts we get from the contractors. Budgets are always reforecasted, adjusted, reprofiled. It's a common practice.
Thank you, Minister, and I appreciate that you're saying that it's common that when you delay projects, that some of that money is no longer needing to be spent because you've delayed the process and the progress on that project. And I'm happy that you're admitting that there's no longer a projected end date. But is making these significant delays, is making these changes going to have any impacts on the costs as we move further down this line? And frankly, Edmontonians and Albertans are waiting for this project. They've been waiting at this point 4 years, and you're telling them it could be 6 or more years still.
So as far as I know, I just read to Member Loyola the budget that's in the current capital plan is $300 million, and if we progress faster than anticipated, then there will be additional funds available.
So I'm going to move on. I think, Minister, I'm happy that we've established that you have no plans on how you're going to finish this project, or even if you or when you plan to finish this project. But I want to move on to another big piece of your portfolio, which is education infrastructure projects that of course your ministry is responsible for building. We know that in Alberta there's a significant capacity strain, and Budget 2022. It seems to me is lacking a significant amount of capital funding for Edmonton Public School District. So I'm wondering that, considering that other districts in the Edmonton area, such as Edmonton Catholic, did receive capital funding in this budget, could you just explain to me the variance and the discrepancy between which boards receive funding and which ones don't?
This budget approved 15 schools. I don't know, last time when you spoke to the Calgary Board of Education to learn more about their process and how many schools actually they prioritize, what my understanding from Minister of Education is she's working with the school boards in Edmonton to bring forward their priority list so they can work through that and provide the necessary funding so infrastructure can build those projects. If you want specific information on those 15 schools, do you want to read into that? Sure.
No,
I'm asking our DM
that.
to assist me in this. So.
Yeah, I don't need the list, Minister. We have a limited amount of time here, so I'm happy to move on if that's the answer you're going to provide.
No, you asked the question. Your constituents in Edmonton South would like to know.
Sure. Yeah, I think we're going to move on. I only have a few minutes left here before I think my block runs out here. So I just want to move on to another question really briefly here. And maybe if your Deputy Minister could just submit that back in writing, that'd be lovely.
Sure, happy to do it.
Thank you. So I want to ask you about Crown land sales. In your estimates document on page 135, on line 5.2, land use and disposal, it states that your ministry is responsible for the sale of surplus Crown lands throughout the province. Obviously, there's been significant public interest in whether parks are going to be delisted, decommissioned, or sold to private interests. So I noticed that this year you're anticipating $200 million in sales and leases, as compared to last year where it was relatively negligible. So could you explain to me why and where this $200 million in revenue is going to be coming from?
As far as I know, not from the sale of any parks, unless you have any specific listing of any park from my department, please do let me know. About the 200 million, can someone help me to?
It's like the line.
Dale, are you stepping forward? Can you give me a second? I'm just asking our ADM.
What line? We don't know what it's for.
Yeah, where did you refer, Member Dang?
Yeah,
Which
so
line?
in your fiscal plan on page 109,
Page.
there is a line item showing a revenue of $200 million, showing $200 million that's going to be there. And of course, your department's responsible for real estate and the sale and lease of lands there.
So, actually, environment parks, they do
Yeah,
their
they do
own.
the parks.
Yeah, parks, environment and parks, they are responsible, but other publicly owned crown properties, we are responsible. I'm just referring page 109, Member Dan, can you help me to
Sure.
get
Maybe I
to
can clarify my question for you, Minister. I guess I'm just asking then, since your department is responsible for real estate, you're telling me that your department has not been directed or is not, you're not directing your department to proceed with any sales in that nature, that you would be, any of the lands you would typically be responsible for?
Yeah, so I'm just scratching my memory. Either Premier or Minister of Parks never asked me to list any of the crown parks.
Sure, okay, I'm going to try and get one more question, and I'm trying to be respectful to some of my other colleagues here. So I appreciate that answer. The last question I have has to deal with the fiscal plan, page 127 and 166. Basically, in it, the Alberta Surgical Initiative shows that there's going to be a great deal of capital expenditure, $37 million this year, $133 million over the next 3 years in these chartered health facilities. Can you explain to me, is your department going to be engaged in building healthcare facilities for these chartered groups to use, these private or otherwise non-government clinics to operate in? Is that the intent of that?
May I answer? Okay. So, that initiative is actually to increase provincial surgical capacity to reduce wait times. So, our role in that is to renovate and improve and expand the operating rooms and also support spaces in 5 locations across Alberta. So Lethbridge, we are going to help them to create 2 additional operating rooms. Calgary, the overall goal was 311 operating rooms. Rocky Mountain House, 1 operating room and new medical device processing department. And in Edmonton, upgrading 2 operating rooms and a post anesthetic care unit. And in Grand Prairie, 2 more operating rooms.
Thank you. I'll give my time to the other independents. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Dang. Emily Barnes.
Thank you, MLA Dang. Thank you, Minister, and to your department for being here today and all the work you do for Albertans. The legislature, lots of renovations going on. That is under your ministry, correct?
Correct.
What is the total cost of the renovations?
Yeah, so I'll get you the answer. I know I respect your limited time. If you want to
thank you very much.
Go to the next one, I'll get you
6 or 8 months ago, the Premier moved out of his suite in the legislature to the Sky Palace and, of course, spent some time in the Sky Palace. What is the total cost of renovating the Premier's suite and office? You can get that later. That would be great.
Yeah.
And back to the Sky Palace. Was there any additional costs incurred by your ministry, incurred by the taxpayer as the Premier moved in and out of the Sky Palace? If you could get that back to me as well. If I could just continue, I'd appreciate that, and just let me know, sir, when you're ready. I want to talk about school projects too. You know, God bless our kids, and Alberta will always be in the business of building schools. I've always been opposed to the idea of P3s building schools because the design should be, you know, it should be a very simple bid, build thing, as schools have been built for 100 years. But I've also been around the infrastructure department when we've talked about some things like having land developers actually build the school to improve their ability to sell their lots. We've talked about supermarkets and other trades that maybe share a school or be close to it so the kids can have some hands-on job experience. And of course, community use is a big thing for these schools. The more they can be used, the better. Minister, is any of that going on in these current school construction?
We are open to that if any proponent wants to submit a proposal through the unsolicited process. I didn't know you don't like P3s because you and I ran on that platform that we'll do more P3s. But anyway, we are where we are. And so if any proponent wants to use that unsolicited process, any developer, we are open to consider that, and I can provide you that information on how that USP process works. Now you asked about, I'll go back to your previous question.
Thank you.
I have some numbers here. $8,500 was spent to move staff and fit up the space in the federal building while the construction occurs
for the Sky Palace for the Premier.
Yeah, while the construction occurs at the legislature. And we didn't use, some staff, they packed their stuff on their own and they moved their items. We didn't use movers for that. But,
how much
but 2,169 was spent to relocate staff back to the legislature building.
Okay. Okay. How about the total cost of renovating the Premier Suite? Do you have a number for that yet?
In the legislature building? I don't have that number handy.
If you could, sir, if you could provide that to the legislature at some point, Albertans would be appreciative.
Okay.
In my last 5 minutes, I want to touch on inflation. Heard last night in the municipal affairs estimates that 3.8% was kind of an indication with the same amount of money in there. Obviously, there's going to be a lot less infrastructure built if inflation is high. And I know several builders that have paused their projects because lumber is through the roof. I know several builders that have just put in the foundations, paused the rest of their projects because steel is through the roof or unavailable, lumber is through the roof. Your department is on the edge of knowing what these cost increases could be and how much more it's going to cost Albertans. What inflation number have you budgeted?
So we are estimating for 21-22, 4.5%.
4.5?
Yeah.
Okay, and then, okay.
22-23, 4. And 23-24, 3%. 24-25, 2.5%. 25-26, 3%. This was before this war in Ukraine started.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned about steel, so nickel and cobalt and other coking coal, all that will be impacted. So those are all the ingredients to make the steel. So.
And thank you for that. And lumber is doubled again and going higher.
It came down actually after it went up. It came down. So we managed.
Yeah, but it came down to. I don't want to really argue about the price of lumber, but it is back up. So let's. I just would ask, did you check that inflation number with a building association, with a contractors association?
See, one good thing about public procurement is it's an open tender, so they will factor those things when they put in their bids. If things like the war or other things happen, then we.
So your department won't use any cost plus or design cost plus contracts?
One of my mandate item is to limit cost plus contracts.
To limit, okay.
Yeah. Or eliminate.
Okay, thank you.
While building aggressively P3 projects.
Okay. Thank you for that. Last session, we passed the Infrastructure Accountability Act. Which infrastructure project in this budget has been approved using that process and that act? Where has the Infrastructure Accountability Act been used?
That, although it was legislated when we enacted this Alberta Infrastructure Accountability Act, but in the past also, even under the previous government before our cycle, they have been using this criteria which is legislated in Alberta Infrastructure Act. That has been already used in the previous couple of capital plans. So if you want to know the projects, all those projects that went through in the last couple of years, in fact, went through that process, even before that was enacted.
Okay. Thank you, sir. You reminded me of when we were in opposition together, and we spent a lot of time talking about a public prioritized infrastructure list that would be totally transparent to Albertans. And of course, there may have to be changes on a list like that someday, but it would force government, it would force the stewards of taxpayer dollars to be totally transparent with Albertans as to why their project got moved from 4th to 6th or from 6th to 4th or whatever. Do you feel that your Infrastructure Accountability Act and this budget honors that public prioritized infrastructure list? How do Albertans know what's going to be next, what's going to be built 8th or 12th, and when?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. That's why together with that Infrastructure Act, we also introduced the 20-year strategic capital plan, which gives them all that priority criteria, what outcomes we are looking at. So other partners like post-secondaries or municipalities, they can align their priorities based on that outcomes government is prescribing through 20-year strategic capital plan. I can give you that information. I want to respect your time. So Albertans can rest assured that transparency will be there. That's why we are going through that 20-year strategic capital plan. We have that criteria prescribed, how those projects are prioritized.
So this concludes the first portion of questions for independent members. We will now move to the government caucus for 20 minutes of questions from those members. I assume that you would like to combine your time with the ministers as has been done.
Yep, you bet.
Mr. Roswell, you begin?
Yep. Yeah, and this kind of follows on MLA Barnes's question, and so this might give you a little more opportunity to expand on that a little bit. So last year, the government passed Bill 73, which was the Infrastructure Accountability Act, and as mentioned on page 153 of the Fiscal Plan, this includes the 20-year strategic capital plan, which has to be updated every 4 years. That's the way it's structured, right? So can you explain what the 20-year strategic plan is and its purpose and how it may have impacted the capital plan of 2022, which I think is what MLA Barnes is trying to get to a little bit.
Right.
Yep.
So the purpose of that is to make foundations about infrastructure investments and also to help boost economic recovery and ensure public infrastructure is in good shape for future generations. For example, our capital plan this year is $20.2 billion. So as you and Member Bonds mentioned, Albertans expect us to be held accountable on how we spend those tax dollars and get the maximum benefit for Albertans on that. So that's why we are putting through hundreds of these infrastructure projects through that process, and in that process, it's creating a lot of jobs during planning, design, and construction phases. Our ministry is mainly focused on working with other partner ministries, for example, and also the job creators. We're working with them. We're taking their input to move forward hundreds of projects. But also this 20-year strategic capital plan is aligning with Alberta's recovery plan to make sure that we are investing in the right provincial infrastructure. to support vital programs and services for our Albertans well into the future. And also this 20-year strategic capital plan will ensure future capital investments attract investments and also attract job creators. So that's the overall objective of that, and that's why we introduced both the Infrastructure Accountability Act and 20-year strategic capital plan. We'll make sure that the government is accountable for meeting its commitment to invest responsibly in capital projects and projects like provincial buildings, recreation and cultural facilities, schools, universities, colleges, healthcare facilities, roads, bridges, and also information technology projects, because that we realized after this pandemic is technology and the latest technology and the infrastructure required to adopt that technology is really important. So we included IT projects as well. And I'm also approaching federal minister. I'm still waiting for his appointment after 5 months, but because of the other priorities and also maybe for other reasons, I can't get in front of him yet. But we are advocating with the federal infrastructure minister to take our input in developing national infrastructure assessment and any future infrastructure funding. We want them to consider to align with our priorities and our outcomes, because the provincial governments and territories, they know their local mandates and what helps their residents to move forward. So we are asking them to involve us in developing that national infrastructure assessment. So we, as you observed, we already released this 20-year strategic capital plan in December 2021. That will provide that long-term, transparent and strategic vision for now and also for the future governments on how to plan and develop the strategies required for the including this capital maintenance and renewal of the infrastructure. With the 20-year strategic capital plan will consider long-term trends for provincial infrastructure and how we will meet the future needs of Albertans. So we look at the trends, what they're looking for, and how do we meet their needs. And it also include specific projects or this 20-year strategic capital plan doesn't include specific projects or funding levels, as the annual capital plan contains these details. So with every budget we have 3-year capital plan. In that 3-year capital plan you will see the listing of the projects, but not in the 20-year strategic capital plan. And also, as you observed, once in every 4 years we can any government of the day get the opportunity to review and update the 20-year strategic capital plan.
Yeah. So you're mainly you're kind of the 20-year plans, the themes that you want to invest in.
The
not
themes,
specific
trends,
projects, because that comes in the budget. That's a 3-year process. Right?
So that gives the certainty and predictability for the partners like the municipalities, for example, to align their capital asks. When they're looking for provincial funding, at least they can align. They can use the same framework and align their priorities and asks based on that.
Yep. Okay. Good. All right. So on page 63, and this lends itself to the Infrastructure Accountability Act, and you know you've explained it to some degree here, but just what is it and what does it do? And I was just wondering. Like, because it's the criteria that you want to set up. And so what is the criteria? So is the transparency in the criteria? So everyone knows what that criteria is when they're trying to figure out their projects? What is the transparency part of the Accountability Act?
So the first, the Act legislates prioritization criteria to guide how capital projects are evaluated, and and it also provides a governance framework for developing the annual capital plan and the development and regular update of a 20-year strategic capital plan. When I say the governance framework, the deputy ministers, so they are involved. There is a committee of deputy ministers. They will go through this capital plan and the process just to keep politics out of prioritization criteria. We did that way. And the 6 criteria that government must consider when evaluating a capital plan submission, those 6 criteria are address health, safety, and compliance needs, align with government priorities and strategies, foster economic activity and create jobs, improve program delivery and services, consider life cycle costs, and whether it will generate a return on investment, because that's really important. It's not just the current price. It's the overall life cycle cost, including the future maintenance requirements, because all these assets we create today, unless they are maintained well and refurbished, then the replacement cost of those assets is too high. That's why we want to consider the overall life cycle costs, and also enhance the resiliency of communities.
Yeah, and this next question, I think you've answered it. It's how the Act impacts projects that are approved and underway before this budget. So in the last 2 years, you've kind of you were implementing that even before we passed it, right? Are there examples of ones that were in process before that, and how you're implementing this Accountability Act into that? Or
So
can you?
this act actually will not impact the projects that have already been approved before, because they applied that criteria as part of previous capital plans, and it will apply to all new project proposals submitted as part of future capital plans. So we took advantage of that criteria and applied that to the previous projects.
Right.
But now it is legislated.
Okay, very good. And just my last question is relative to capital maintenance and renewal, and whether it's part of this act at all.
Sorry.
Capital maintenance and renewal,
Yeah.
and whether it's part of the act at all.
No, it's not part of the act. So it's considered outside of the act through a separate privatization process. We are developing for that, for the CMR projects, because we recognize that CMR is a lower risk work compared to the capital builds, and scopes are smaller relatively, and those CMR projects are also, the projects like boiler replacement, for example, the scope of that is significantly smaller compared to the major capital builds, and that's why we apply different criteria. So we are developing that.
Yeah, and it's
So
it's
right
part
now
of the
this-
ongoing business of having capital, right?
Right.
You need to
So-
maintain it, yeah.
Yeah, so right now we are applying this to, for example, projects like schools and hospitals.
Sure.
But for CMR, commensurate to their scope and risk of that project, so we are developing a different criteria for it.
Perfect, good. Okay, I will cede some time to MLA Walker.
Thank you, MLA Rosewell, and through Chair Newdorf, Minister, welcome. Welcome to your staff. This has been a really enlightening dialogue. Estimates, of course, is such an important process in our Westminster parliamentary system. Minister, through the chair, my focus will be on the impact of COVID-19. Wow, that could be a whole 2 hours in itself. But I'm really curious to know, for example, in my own riding, and we're excited about design funding for a new replacement school. We're booming locally in Strathcona County. This is great. But I am hearing on infrastructure projects regarding the enhanced cleaning that has been taking place due to COVID-19. So I'm really curious I'll cite page 146, Minister, of the fiscal plan that your ministry witnessed increased spending due to enhanced cleaning requirements spurred on again by the impact of COVID-19. What impact has COVID-19 had on the management of government facilities? If you could just expand on that. Thanks.
Thank you. It definitely had some impact because we were directed by the Chief Medical Officer of Health to implement the additional measures required to keep the occupants of those buildings safe. So our total property management contractors and landlords, because some of the properties we lease, so we worked with them. They have provided their COVID-19 plans to demonstrate their ability and commitment to meet the requirements. And in-house and contracted staff, they continue to provide a proactive and evolving response to requests for preventative measures and responsive cleaning and ensure timely communication with Public Service Commissioner to understand and achieve the current standards. For example, here in Federal Building and Legislature, you see the frequent sanitization and all the cleaning that happens on regular basis. We are also in touch with government property managers to make sure proper maintenance and cleaning happens at government buildings. For example, we keep soap and hand sanitizer stations filled on regular basis. Contractors and visitors, they are required at all times to keep our workplace safe from the spread of germs. And employees, we urge them to regularly and thoroughly wash their hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. And employees who work in this office maintain clean workstations, and if we just encourage them to stay home if they don't feel well.
Well, thank you for that very thorough response, Minister. And I also want to highlight and thank all the amazing cleaning work that's done here at the legislature ground facilities. I see it too. I know everyone else here sees it, and just amazing work they're doing. And I think I heard in your comments that, yeah, the cleaning continues to be done as we're still in the pandemic stage, hopefully moving to endemic. Minister, I guess my final question in my time remaining, are any highlights, or I guess what I would say through the chair, what is being done to ensure construction site safety and manage COVID-19 risks while delivering infrastructure projects? Just any key highlights to this question. Thank you.
Yeah, so we definitely have protocols in place on all construction projects to prevent the spread of COVID-19. But as Member Walker, you're quite familiar with the construction activities. Even before the pandemic, the local construction contractors here, they have their own mandates when it comes to protective PPEs. That protective equipment, they are, for example, on the work site, they always are required to wear hard hats and safety vests and steel-toed boots and all that. So after this pandemic, the additional requirement was face masks and distancing, and sanitizers were used on construction sites even before, but now there is a protocol for it. So if anyone exhibiting flu-like symptoms, they must they must not come to work and consult with a health professional. And they have to avoid in-person meetings when possible and minimize number of attendees. And it requires workers to maintain physical distancing and practice personal hygiene, and they should implement job sanitation measures, which most of our sites were already following that. But you know, with all that work done by the responsible contractors, actually, we are progressing well on all construction sites.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think this was a really fruitful dialogue. I'll cede my remaining time to my colleague, MLA Armstrong Homniuk. Thanks.
Thank you. Chair, through you to the Minister, I'd like to ask the Minister a question here. Outcome number 1 on page 65 of the business plan is stated as innovative, adaptive, and responsible infrastructure solutions that meet current and future provincial needs. On February 23rd, the government announced a historic expansion to the Red Deer Regional Hospital. Can the minister provide an overview of the scope and estimated cost of the new Red Deer Regional Hospital project, as well an explanation of how it links to this outcome?
Thank you. As I mentioned before, this government prioritized Red Deer Regional Hospital. We actually approved the full funding for that project in this recent budget because we recognize the importance of expanding and upgrading Red Deer Regional Hospital Center to meet long-term needs of not only Red Deer residents but all Central Albertans. So that's why we have clearly committed to build that hospital, and we have allocated $1.8 billion for the design and construction of that Red Deer Regional Hospital, which is one of the largest spend on a healthcare facility outside of Calgary and Edmonton. And in the next 3 years, the 2022 capital plan is providing $193 million out of the total $1.8 billion approved. That's mainly for redevelopment and expansion of Red Deer Regional Hospital Center, so which will include construction of an ambulatory services building, redevelopment of the main hospital site, including a new inpatient tower, the development of cardiac catheterization labs, increased operating room capacity, and expansion of the medical device reprocessing department.
Thank you, Minister. Chair, through you to the Minister again. I see under objectives supporting outcome 1 on page 65 of the business plan lists that $661.1 million will be allocated to the construction of health facilities in budget 2022-23. This includes $171.8 million for the Calgary Cancer Centre. Can the minister provide the committee with an update on this project?
I'm happy to report that the construction of that cancer center is 90% completed. That will provide improved cancer care services for Calgarians and southern Albertans.
Sorry to interrupt. This concludes the government member's first block of questions. We will now move to 5 minutes of questions from the official opposition, followed by 5 minutes of response from the minister. As mentioned, members are asked to advise the chair at the beginning of their rotation if they wish to combine their time with the minister's time. Please remember that all discussion should flow through the chair at all times, even though I've been very lenient with that, regardless of whether or not speaking time is combined. Ms. Hoffman.
Yeah, I would be happy to combine my time if the minister's willing.
Yes.
Please proceed.
Super. So I'm going to speak to the fiscal plan in the capital plan documents, page 159, as my primary focus during this brief amount of time. And one of the lines, this is under the Renewing Educational Infrastructure section, says these projects will support enrollment growth in communities that continue to see population growth, preserve and modernize existing facilities and consolidate underutilized spaces, thereby reducing maintenance costs in those communities experiencing enrollment or population decline. And I have to say that having done a number of capital plan submissions under my former role, there's sort of 3 lists you submit. You submit your new project asks, you submit your modernization asks, and then you're asked to also submit a consolidated list. But there are 3 lists that get submitted, essentially. And I guess one of my questions would be, how is the government choosing to define community? Because we know that there were a number of modernization projects, particularly for the 4 large metro boards, including Calgary and Edmonton public and Catholic districts, that didn't get announced, and part of the rationale or excuse that was given was that they were underutilized. But specifically, the fiscal plan says that underutilized spaces should be right-sized and modernized. So is that not one of the criteria that the government has been using? And if not, can they change the criteria and be open about that so that growing communities like Edmonton and Calgary can get a fair shot at infrastructure projects through you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Member Hoffman for that question. Certainly, I'll discuss with education if there are additional projects that require modernization. But in this budget, that was definitely considered, and there are, for example, Rocky View School Division. That's modernization and addition of Bow Valley High School. So in Cochrane. There are other modernizations.
Perhaps I could clarify, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So Edmonton Public specifically had two modernizations on their top two lists for their capital plan, Delton Elementary School and Spruce Avenue Junior High School. They also had schools in McConaughey, a junior high, and Glenreading, a junior and senior high that are desperately needed. They received no capital projects this year or last year in the budget. And that simply doesn't align with what your fiscal plan identifies as your goals, because certainly Edmonton is growing significantly, and Edmonton also does have older infrastructure. So the question is why, with this being identified as your priority, why is it that Edmonton public students didn't get any infrastructure in this year's budget?
It's not true that they didn't get any infrastructure. Actually, there are a few schools.
Edmonton Public.
Even, yeah, so I would encourage you to take it with the Minister of Education, because my understanding is Edmonton Public has to provide their prioritized list to her.
I have it in front of me. It's submitted every year in March, so I have it in front of me for all of the major metro boards. I imagine the minister, as a Calgary MLA, has probably seen the Calgary Catholic and Calgary Public submissions as well. There absolutely is a list, an itemized list. Every district does it.
Yeah, for sure. In Calgary also, for example, last week we announced that Evanston school there.
Yeah, 2 schools for Calgary in 3 years. Nothing last year, nothing the year before for public or Catholic students in Calgary. So questions that are being asked to me by Calgary Catholic families are around the need for new schools in Nolan Hill and Walden. Those are both K-9s. Certainly, I'm sure the minister has heard about the desperate need for a high school for Catholic students in West Calgary. As well, they also had modernizations that weren't funded. These are all year 1 capital plan submissions. And for Calgary Public, Diefenbaker High School, desperate need of modernization. Nichols School, also modernization, grades 5 to 9. Saddle Ridge needs a new school, grades 5 to 9. Cornerstone needs a high school. So there are significant, these are all year 1 assessed needs based on criteria that's being set by the government. This is set as urgent needs. In a typical NDP year, under the 4 years when the minister was in opposition, there were about 60 projects, education projects announced every year. This time it's 11. So why is it that when we have record revenue that we're not seeing the needs addressed for our largest school districts, which are certainly growing?
No, I appreciate your concern. In fact, there are 15 schools that were announced this year, which includes new schools, modernization, replacements. So in total, there are 15 schools. There are schools in Edmonton and everywhere. And also, there were many other schools already under construction. There are 66 schools that are under construction, creating thousands of student spaces. I can give a quick update on the status of those 66. 35 are in planning design contract, either contract awarded or tendered, and 22 in construction.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I do definitely have the news releases before me. It's 11 actual projects for funding, for planning projects. And none of them, I know the minister keeps saying Edmonton, and certainly I'm grateful that Edmonton Catholic's getting some schools, but no projects for public students in the city of Edmonton. And that is a significant massive hole that I think is going to significantly hurt student learning. Because we also know, and this is why the fiscal plan talks about the importance to right-size underutilized spaces or buildings that are old, that when we don't fund capital properly, money comes out of operation to pay for the capital. So to pay for a leaky roof, you're hiring 1 less teacher. to pay for that school bus that's seeing its transportation costs go up because of insurance and because of the cost of fuel. You're seeing a reduction in the operational support. So by underfunding capital across the province, I'm just highlighting 4 of our largest districts, it has an impact on operations as well. So, and again, for context, there were about 60 projects per year when the NDP was in government, and now we're looking at 60 cumulatively over a term for our government. So that's a significant reduction in the amount of support that schools saw and students saw. Generally a question through you, Mr. Chair.
So, yeah, Mr. Chair, if you permit me to respond, actually we are investing $1.5 billion for school capital projects. Out of that, 268.4 million is spent in Edmonton, right here in Edmonton.
None for public schools.
And $172 million is in Calgary, and $844 million is outside of Calgary and Edmonton, and $203.2 million is province-wide programs to be allocated as capital maintenance and renewal. So the fact that Edmonton got the lion's share of that 1.5 billion, these are the facts. This is not an opinion. This is the money allocated through the budgeting process. So, and also I don't think schools have to spend their CMR money on capital projects because they can't fund enough, because CMR money, I mean, each school project ranges from $25 to $40 million. So CMR budget is much lower, so they can't use that to build a school.
Mr. Chair, to clarify, I'm not talking about building schools. I'm talking about regular maintenance on old buildings that need to be moved out of the system. So instead of keeping schools that are unsafe for students or less quality learning opportunities are available, they're asking for, all districts across the province are asking for major modernizations or replacement schools to get unsafe infrastructure or infrastructure that was overbuilt when families had 5 or 6 kids living in a bungalow, and now many of those families have 1 or 2. They want to right-size these schools, and they want to have quality buildings, just like the government has chosen to modernize a number of the office buildings that office workers work in. And I want to again clarify and re-articulate for the minister, there are no Edmonton public projects. I know he keeps saying Edmonton. There are no Edmonton public projects that were announced last week, and there weren't any last year either. So that is clearly a huge the government that likes to talk about choice is choosing to neglect infrastructure supports for students who choose public schools in Edmonton. I think that's wrong. I think there's also need for more Catholic schools. And Calgary only got 2 schools in 3 years for public and Catholic students. I know that the minister might want to talk about other types of choice out there, but it's clear the government has significantly neglected much needed infrastructure. As they identify in their fiscal plan, they're going to build where there's growth. There's growth in Edmonton and Calgary, and the government's failing these students and the families who've chosen to send their students to public and Catholic schools.
Thank you. I can't allow that, unfortunately, Minister. We now move to 5 minutes of questions from the official opposition, followed by 5 minutes of response from the minister if we end up with enough time. I assume you wish to combine your time with the minister?
Sorry, independent, yes.
Independent, sorry.
Yeah.
Please proceed.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister and staff, for being here today. Appreciate the opportunity to ask some questions. I guess I was kind of struck by something yesterday when we were in estimates with the Municipal Affairs Minister. He talked about the Alberta government pays the property tax rate at about half, about 50% of what the normal rate is for buildings within a municipality, Alberta government buildings within a municipality. And so when I thought of that, then I also remembered getting a communication from a nonprofit organization in one of my communities that has previously been using an office in the provincial building and has been previously having the rent free. But now I guess there's a movement within the department to charge an appropriate amount of rent for these for the buildings and offices within the provincial government's mandate. And I guess I can understand that idea as far as financial wise and budget wise, that you would want to get fair compensation for the public's buildings, the Alberta government's public's building. But what I thought of at that time is, like, again, we have the situation where this nonprofit is now will be paying $900 a month for rent in a provincial building, and the government itself is only paying 50% of the tax rate to the municipality. And of course, the nonprofit is a benefit to the municipality. And the nonprofit is actually funded by both government funds and, you know, municipal donations. So I just wondered if there's something, I just wanted to make sure you could maybe consider that as you're made this move to increase the rent for people that are in Alberta government buildings.
We recently tried to streamline that process, who gets to occupy government properties and what type of rent, because we had, based on the partner ministry's prioritization criteria, because I won't know what type of programs come.
I apologize for the interruption, but I must advise the committee that the time allotted for the consideration of the ministry's estimates has concluded. I would like to remind committee members that we are scheduled to meet tomorrow, March 9th, 2022 at 9 a.m. to consider the estimates of the Ministry of Jobs, Economy and Innovation. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to especially thank Lacey, our talented technical engineering staff, for her incredible work today. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.